I'm JoLene Bunnell, and I've been the 4-H agent in Utah County for 13 years. And I've probably been writing grants for about 6-7 years of that. Maybe a teeny bit before that, but not much. And what motivated me to start writing grants is there's me in this county, and we have 132 schools in this county, so there's a lot of kids that I have the possibility of serving, and there's me. So that was kind of my motivation, is like, okay, do I even do a program that ties to a school, and I do it in one school and that's the only school gets served? Or, I wanted to expand myself basically and what I can do. And so that's what kind of got me started into writing grants, is to kind of just expand our program to other places. And I'm only one person, I can't do it all. So that's what got me started in doing this. And when you start writing grants, you've got to basically figure out what's important to you, what you're going to ask for, and you narrow that program down. You got to have some area of a focus. If you're all over the board, you're going to burn yourself out. You've got to decide on something that you want to focus on. And with me, there's 3 areas that that was the only things I'll write for, is 4-H mentoring, and that would be YFP for a lot of you guys. We just call it 4-H mentoring in Utah County. 4-H after school, and 4-H awards and recognition. And those can be in a variety of means. Scholarships to go to camps, awards for achievement nights off their portfolio, scholarships for college, any kind of award or recognition. And what I try to do in every proposal I write, I try to incorporate all 3 of those components in every grant proposal. That makes it easy that you can, out of after-school funds, you can fund a family night out that's part of your mentoring program. And out of any grant, I can have kids go to camps and retreats and provide scholarships for that. So I try to incorporate all of those. So whatever your area of focus is, whether it's, you just got to decide what you want to do. If it's bankruptcy you want to prevent, you're going to focus on that, and that's what you're going to write your money for. If it's childhood obesity, there's a lot of money out there for that. You can just focus on an area. I'm almost to the point, I haven't done it yet, where I think I can expand from those areas to enrich my program. Like, I could write for childhood obesity money, and because half of our clubs are fitness clubs and after school, and it would work there. But then I'm narrowed to say, okay, we've got to do those kind of clubs. I haven't been willing to narrow myself down yet, but I'm almost to the point where we're big enough we could do that. Or if you're, into the arts, we do lots of arts and crafts, music, those type of clubs in our after school. I could write for art money and get that. So there's a lot of ways you can look for money that way. And I try to use old grant proposals and anything else that I write. I keep reusing them and just tweaking them to fit the funding source. It's critical when you're trying to sustain your program that you have a really defined vision and goal of what you want to do, because you can just chase money. And I don't want to just chase money. If it doesn't fit my parameters of what I want, I don't even go for it, because I don't want to be, I'm going to tweak my program to do childhood obesity, or I'm going to tweak it to do art, and then you get away from your original vision and goal. You got to make sure you're going to write for what that vision and goal is, and not really have a program that's all over the place without it. I guess you could, but it's just, you lose your purpose. I try to bring in as many partners as possible that will support that vision and goal. So if I'm working with the schools, I bring in the school district administration, the principals of every one of those schools, maybe their PTA leader in that school. So I try to get as many partners that has that same vision and goal and that same enthusiasm about what we want to do, and get them all involved. And that happens over time. That didn't happen at the very beginning. It was more me approaching them saying, hey, we want to do a program in your school. How do you feel about that? Da, 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 da. And then as we grow, it's more because that other principal, hey, we love what you see over there in the neighboring school. Is there any way we can get that? And you start building those partnerships as you go along. And then to be sustainable, you need to diversify your funds. If you're relying on one single grant, those grants end. Every grant ends. It's not an eternal thing. You need to make sure you diversify as many places as you can. Even if it's small little pies, piece of the pie, you know, you need to say, okay, if we're going to be here in the school district, what are you providing? What are you giving, whether it's in kind or if it is a financial thing. Every school, we don't charge for any space. We get all equipment used for free, any playground equipment, any balls, art supplies, computer lab, all of that's provided. Any publicity, marketing, they provide. Any printing that goes out to every family at the school, they pay for all of that. And they agreed to do that all up front. That's their bargain. So the school district has to put some in if you're working with them. I work with Human Services here in the county, and they throw in a little teeny piece of the pie. And United Way has, I've got Provo money. I just try to get different streams and little pieces of the pie from a lot of different people. But no matter how many in kind and all of those things, I think you can't sustain a lot of our programs in extension without writing grants. I think you got to write some grants or you're not going to be able to sustain it for long. In your long-term plan of your programs, you've got to write some grants. Okay, where do you look for grant sources? How I kind of got started, it was just things that were coming to me. I take the Clover Corner News, it's a national newsletter, and they'll throw in every once in a while some grant opportunities that are in there. That's kind of what got me started. So if you are into a certain thing, if you're into after school, take their newsletter that talks about after school and where they make announcements of things that are coming up. If you're into nutrition, take a nutrition newsletter. If you're into the Dairy Council or want to promote calcium, you take their newsletter, or whatever like-minded kind of organization that you can take any of their newsletters. That'll help you find resources. You can go to local libraries and your city councils. There are a lot of times they know of things that come up. And if there's any key decision makers in your county, use them. They know funding sources that you might not know of. And an example of that was when we were doing our 4-H mentoring program, and Prevention Services had approached the commissioners of wanting to start a mentoring program. And they're like, that's 4-H. They're already doing that. You work with them. So they wanted to count in their reports. They're doing mentoring, so they funneled money for us, and we run it, and we just report back to them. So we got money through them because of our connection with the county commissioners of knowing what we do, and says, oh, there's a funding pie that wants to fund mentoring. So they funneled it to us, or gave us that. You can always go to grants.gov. That's the big one where all the federal grants are listed. And everything they offer will be listed there, no matter what it entails. There's 3 main sources that you can look for grants: private or independent foundations. You can go to business and corporations, and then you can go to government. And that would be federal, state, could be city government as well. These are some examples of grants that I've received in the past. I have some money from JCPenney's, and that would be kind of a corporate idea of grants, and they fund our after school at $113,000. I have community development block grant money from Provo City, and that one has a 3-page application that you have to fill out, a 5-page narrative. A lot of the narratives are getting shorter and shorter. They don't want to read a lot of stuff, so they're getting shorter. I just went this past year from 8 pages to 5, and with that one you have to also do a verbal presentation to a panel of people, and that always helps me if I get to present as well, because then I can be more persuasive. And I always dress in a suit like this. I own one. This is it, and it goes on when I do grant presentations. Yes, So it's a grant presentation. I wore my suit. And I think that helps if you can verbally make a presentation. And some of these funding sources that are kind of smaller, little city things, they usually do that. They'll have a panel of people that you want to present to. And even if they don't normally do presentations, you can even say, hey, can I come and present to your group if they've got a pie of money. Sicka Money was that way, where you could present to them and then they funded rogue things, whatever. There might not have been depending on your group, there might not have been a goal of what they were only funding. They were just like, whatever good projects are, and so try to get involved and present to them. Our prevention services through the county, their grant proposal was just a one-page logic model. Very simple. Office of Child Care, that's state money, that's for after-school sites, or it could be for child care issues, but they'll fund after school. That was a 15-page narrative. And then I have one big federal grant from the Department of Education, and that one was about 50 pages long. It was a huge thing, plus a lot of extras that they required. And if you look on that list, they also have things, you got to look what's required of you also in the grant. Some it's just an annual report you have to send in every year. Sometimes it's a monthly report. Prevention services, we have to send them something monthly. Can you handle what the reporting requirements are as well? You got to look at what you have to do in addition to those. And some have physical site visits where they come out and visit you and see how you're doing and those type of things. So take that into consideration. Okay, what do you think is the most important sections of a grant proposal? Any ideas? Okay, got your paper. I think it's a table of contents. And let me pass out a table of contents to you. Okay, this is an example of a table of contents of my big federal grant, the one that was $500,000. Out of every grant proposal I've ever looked at, how many do you think asked for a table of contents? 0. So this is something most people do not do in a grant proposal. But I think it's very important. We'll go over that in just a few minutes. I'll have a whole slide on that.
Did you
Yeah.
decide this yourself through grant writing?
No. This is a trick I learned maybe 4 years ago. I went to a grant kind of little workshop from a professional grant writer that worked for Provo City Schools, Provo City School District. And she would write grants, and she was wanting to write from some of these Youth Connections money, the state money. And she wanted the requirement of the grant was each entity could only write for 2 schools. So Provo School District could only write for 2 schools. Well, they wanted all 8 elementary schools, hopefully, to get this money, but they needed community partners to do that. And I was already doing stuff with one of their elementary schools. And so I said, yeah, I'm going to write for that money. She goes, well, come to our workshops that we're going to teach these community partners how to write grants. And I knew a lot, but there was just a few little tricks that I picked up from her, and that was one to do a table of contents that she always turns in. And she's managing about $6 million every year of grants that she's brought in. So she was a pretty good grant writer. She's retired now, and she's bought a villa in Italy. She's doing quite well in her retirement years after writing these grants. The next area is the budget. You need to have a good budget. And then your narrative, what you say, would be the third importance in your thing. And most people pick out their needs statement as what they think is the most important. I just need this money. This money is, we're desperate. We have, that kind of stuff. And then what they plan to do. And I'll refute some of those in a couple of more sites. Okay, our table of contents. This is the very, very, very first thing I work on. I take their grant RFP. An RFP is a request for proposal. That's where they explain what is required in your grant. So I take that RFP and I digest it. I take my highlighter and I underline everything they put in there, okay, that I think needs to be in my proposal. and I go through and I make a table of contents from that. Okay? So if you look at this table of contents here, if you go down to the narrative part, these other papers up above are required forms, and then the narrative here, or where it said the project narrative. Need for the project is the first thing they mentioned that you need to talk about. Well, it might have a paragraph in there that talks about need, things you need to mention about need. And so I go in there, they mention something about how many kids are you going to serve in this program? Are they at risk of educational failure or dropout, involvement in crime, delinquent, or gang activity, lack strong positive role models? I just kind of digested those and made up my own table of contents and bumped them in when I saw things that we're talking about, those type of things. And if you look down that's how I've done this. Okay, once I've done that, then I start writing the narrative, and I take that table of contents, save it as a narrative, and so I punch it in right under. So all those headings are exactly like they're going to show up in my table of contents. You know, I'll have a little heading that says quality of project design, and another heading that will say high quality mentoring projects that provide, you know, services or whatever, and then I'll go into the others. It might be in a paragraph form. So that's the very first thing I work on. Even if I can't turn it in, which I've always turned it in, but they're getting more electronically, and I might not be able to turn them in electronically, it still gives me the format of how to work on it. And when you're doing this, like I said, you follow the exact format in the RFP. However it's formatted, if you think it's a totally illogical format, too bad, you follow it. Okay? If it doesn't make sense, too bad, you follow exactly how they have it. Okay? And you outline everything, every section, every goal, every priority, every objective, whatever they say in there, you're going to have that show up in your table of contents. Okay? That gives you that format of how you're going to write your narrative. And to me, the way you have that laid out in your narrative is way more important than what you actually say you're going to do. If they can find it when they're judging these, you might have an evaluator that's evaluating these grant proposals that has seen 10, 15, 20 of them. And they are reading them, skimming them pretty fastly, going through, judging them, and you might have covered a point and they can't remember. Oh, they didn't cover this. But if they go back, oh, yeah, they did. It's on their table of contents. They must have covered it. They can go back to a 2-page thing, a 1-page thing, and say, boom, it's there. Oh, yeah, they covered it. So that's why I think it's so valuable. Even if they don't hardly even read your thing, oh, they talked about it. It's right here. It's that structure, that format, that organization. That's what gets you the money, I think. And of course, always follow the right font size, all of that stuff. You don't want to do something a little stupid thing like, oh, it says double space, but I can't get it all in. I'll do it 1.75 space, and they won't notice. They'll notice. They'll kick it out. It says 12 points. You don't go 10 points. You do it 12. Don't do any of those little silly things. Okay. I'm going to have you guys write a table of contents. I'm going to break you up in small groups. That's why I gave you pencils. Okay. And why don't we have the 3 of you, the 2 of you, the 2 of you, and the 2 of you are going to work as a team. Okay. And you can use your back of your papers here. Okay. This is our RFP. Okay. Some RFPs are very short and don't give you a lot of details. Other RFPs will give you 50 pages to explain how you're supposed to write for 10 pages. Okay? So you've got company XYZ is accepting proposals for parties interested in improving the life of children in K through 12 grade. Company XYZ's goals are improve children literacy, promote healthy life choices, and expose youth to the arts. Okay? The priority, will be given to programs that focus on underprivileged communities. Programs should provide quality design and evaluation. Okay? Start trying to work as a team on figuring out what your table of contents will be. A perfect table of contents, a standard that has to be the same.
Probably not.
No. This is what you're going to come up with. Okay? Bing, bing, bing. Name of your program.
4-H Child Life Improvement
Oh,
Program.
I guess.
Okay? You need to have the name of your program at the top. Okay? What's going to be next?
Table of contents.
Table of contents. You guys are technical writers. Good. Bing, 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 bing. Table of contents next.
Very good, so.
Okay. Those ones are supposedly the easiest, but those are ones people forget all the time. Okay. Now let's look at what they told us they wanted. What do you put down first?
Well, the first thing they asked for was that they wanted to do something to improve the life of the children K through 12.
Okay.
We stuck that in our check. That's why we.
What?
They stuck that in their title.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was good. I like
So we have title, whatever you want to name your program. Okay. If you look at mine, 4-H After School Mentoring of Utah County. Okay. This was actually a mentoring program, but I tied it to our after school as well, so I can use money both ways. I include parts of our after school in there, parts of our mentoring. Okay. Every one of my after school ones also says 4-H After School Mentoring at Suncrest Elementary, at Hillcrest, whatever. Okay. So I make sure I have both audiences in there. So you have your title. Okay. And then you want to label it. This is your table of contents. Okay. What should be number one? Okay. Debbie?
just need.
No.
What?
Don't call it need.
Interesting.
Did they call it need?
No, they called it, what did they call it? They wanted to fix, let me look and see. Improving the life of children.
Okay. That's what you need to have first. You might put in your,
Their first line is that's what you need.
you need to do.
But
Did we say need in that? No. Did it say need? We don't say need. Okay.
How far would you want to go though? Because, you know, it says to improve the life of children K through 12. Would you want to put that?
You might, or you could
Improve
just,
the life of
children, whatever, both work. Okay. What would be our next point?
well, they're goals. So you're gonna do the
Goals of, and you could list your title of your program, whatever your program. Are your goals different than the goals of the funding source? Never, never are your goals different than the funding source. Okay. Goals. Okay. What are our goals? Okay. I'm a terrible chalkboarder person. I'll have to figure this out if you can't read it. Okay. Healthy lifestyle choices. Okay, and on and on. Next one.
arts.
Arts.
Focus on arts. What did they say? Expose youth to arts.
Okay. Okay, what's next?
Could you also list though as a goal for reaching a privilege?
Could. It's not from what I would do.
Next, or is that number 3?
That would be number 3. What are you going to call it?
Focus on
Reaching underprivileged audience served.
No, not audience served.
Their words.
Reaching underprivileged.
Okay, you got to make sure you say underprivileged communities. Are we saying youth? No, we're using communities because that's what they
I
have.
don't say put a verb or anything in front of it, just
Well, you could, but that's the verbiage that has to be in there. Underprivileged communities. Okay, what's next?
Because you don't want them guessing.
Right.
If they have to guess, then they're gonna go with somebody they don't have to guess.
Mm-hmm.
Can you add your own little ABC over there or go straight to the last?
If they had additional, let's say, improve children literacy, and they gave you a paragraph or something that defined what that meant, then I'd bump in and put whatever those words were in there. I'd bump in another layer. Okay? Okay, what would you do next?
Evaluation.
Nope.
I do quality design.
Quality design. Oh, this is a 3, that's a 4. Okay?
Evaluation.
Evaluation. Okay, where are we really talking about need, do you think? Down here. Okay, underprivileged communities. Is that logically where you talk about need? No.
I think they do it before you tell them.
Usually it's first. But is that how they
That's how
they designed their RFP? No, you follow exactly the way they followed their RFP. You don't change it around. Oh, I need to talk about the need first. No, you don't. You talk about it where they talked about it. You never change that format they give you. That's why the table of contents is so important. It gives you your format of how you're going to write your grant. Okay? And if you can actually physically turn it in, it gives them the outline and they can just skim. Oh yeah, they talked about that.
So that's just the outline, just like that.
Mhm.
That for this particular grant.
Yep, for that things that I gave you. Okay?
So JoLene, would
Yeah.
they say include table of contents or?
No,
include-
I've never ever had a grant proposal ask for table of contents.
Never.
Have they ever told me not to turn it in or penalized me? No, they never have. That's something I've just thrown in there. Usually you don't add extra stuff. If they don't tell you to do it, don't add it. But I've always done table of contents. Federally, bigger entities, states probably going to go to that way. They haven't yet, where everything has to be e-submissions. There's no way I can send it as an e-submission because it won't. It would have to count as my narrative pages.
they only give you some.
Yeah, yeah. So it won't be going in some of the next ones that I submit because they won't allow it. But, okay, let's go back to this paper. I want you to look at this.
But I guess it organizes you. So you
It does. Even if you can't turn it in, it's the most important part of your whole thing, even if it can't physically go in. Okay, I want you to look at this table of contents. It's long. This is a long table of contents. I've gone through, on my narrative, I'm given 25 pages to write my narrative. If you go down here, I'm talking about the need for the project, pages 1 to 5. And then I've broken that down. Page 1 to 2 is this, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5. Goes all the way down in chronological order down to page 25, where I've mentioned those things. And then look at the bottom of this. What in the heck have I done at the bottom of this table of content? The big, huge grants are the worst at this, I think. The ones that give you 50 pages of how to write a 25-page narrative kind of thing. They'll throw things in there that you have to do that they don't say you're going to be graded on. But you better have them, and you don't know where to put them. Okay? So these are the things they mentioned in that RFP. They had some absolute priorities. These better happen, but they never put it in their evaluation criteria. But they better be there because they're an absolute priority. Okay? So these are their absolute priorities. Did I change their wording at all? No. It said to address academic and social needs of children with greatest need. Okay? I've mentioned how I'm doing that on page 2 to 3, on page 9, and page 15. Okay? I'm providing school-based mentoring programs and activities. I talk about all of those between page 5 and 7. I'm serving youth in grades 4 through 8. Okay? This one I think you could serve anywhere from kindergarten to 12th. And that's my narrow down. So the youth I'm serving, page 1, page 6, and page 15. That shows up somewhere in there. Youth reside in rural, high crime, troubled homes, or school with violence. Okay, I talk about that's what theirs said. I'm identifying where these higher crimes, troubled homes are. I wasn't focusing on rural, but I still put that in there because that's what their thing says. And it says an or in there because I could hit any of those. I mentioned them on page 1 and page 3 to 5. Okay, so you can look down there. Then they had something, competitive preference. A consortium, this is their words, a partnership basically, or working together between an LEA, that's their term, that's a local educational agency, that would be the school district, and a CBO, a community-based organization, that is 4-H. So we are a collaboration between those two entities. I'm working with the school district and 4-H are working together. Eligibility requirements. So you better be eligible. You better address that you're eligible for this. Nowhere in there they say they're evaluating you on whether you're eligible or not. But you better be eligible or they're going to throw it out. So you better address your eligibility. Okay? You're able to establish clear, measurable performance goals. I talk about my goals on page 23 through 24. I'm going to collect and report data to the GEPRA. I can't even remember what they stand for. But I'm using their acronyms. It basically, I had to look at attendance, grades, is what they required as indicators that I was going to look at, and I talk about that in my evaluation on those pages. And then they had statutory requirements, whatever those mean, and so I put all of those things that they talk about, and those don't follow logical order, but I'm making sure they can find those. So, oh, did they meet the eligibility? Oh, they must have. It's on page 24 through 25. So they must be still eligible. She's addressed those. So they can go back to that table of contents and find those things hidden in your proposal. Those are the things that a lot of times ding you because they can't find them. You glossed over it in an introductory paragraph at the start, and they're like, I don't think she talked about that. And, oh, yeah, she did. It's right here. So all of those are on there. Okay, and as you can see, that goes down whole another page and a half is all of those kind of things that were in the grant proposal that I addressed in the table of contents. And some might be on a required form that they have, like budget narrative, other funds, you know, I've mentioned those kind of things, where those things are coming from in there, okay? Table of contents is important. Okay, budget. That's my next most important thing in grant proposal. Take a budget and pass it along. I might need to keep one of those. Let me use yours because I didn't make quite enough copies, and I'll give it to you like these after we're done. Okay, on your budget, know how much you can ask for and should ask for. Bigger grant entities will tell you, we're going to fund 150 proposals of a maximum of $200,000 a year. Smaller they are, you have no clue how much you can ask for. The first time I asked for Provo Community Development Block money, I thought, okay, I want to fund one full mentoring site. I was thinking it cost me about $39,000. That's what I asked for. At the end, after they'd selected everybody who's going to be funded, they didn't fund a single person over $10,000. So I was stupid to ask for $39,000. Okay? But then I knew, oh, okay, they're going to fund programming stuff. They're not going to fund any salary. They're not going to, you know, but it took me a year of going through that process to learn that. If I was smart enough, could have gone to the library and found it, where they had to publish these in the, you know, some minutes, public record stuff, but I hadn't done that. So then I knew, okay, that's around my limit, is about $10,000 that I can hope to get from them, because they didn't fund a single entity above that. So try to figure that out, how much you can ask for. This is something that I do, and I've gotten tons and tons of positive responses on my budgets that I submit, and I never, ever, ever ask for the full amount, ever. Talk to Nancy Pazzaretti, that professional grant writer, always, always, always ask for the max, because they're going to cut you, you ask for the max you can get. I'm just the opposite of that. I never ask for the full amount. That amount might be, if you can ask for a maximum of $30,000, it might be $29,982. Okay? But I never ask for the full amount. The reason I don't, because then I can use real, true figures. I didn't have to massage anything to come up with a whole number. And they like that. They can see that this is an honest number. And I'm not just fluff there, trying to come up with it. Like I said, use realistic figures, and we'll go through this budget in just a second. Double check your math. Oh, you don't want to have any errors. And it's easy to make errors because you massage that budget all the time. You're working with it, and so you've written that budget and you think you've got it, and I need to change this. We want to make sure that's included in there. And so I got to add that, so I got to cut something else down. So you're just constantly massaging that budget. And you might have your totals add up, but in your narrative, you might have forgotten to change from an old one or something like that. So double check it all the time and provide plenty of narrative about your budget. You need to give an explanation of why it's needed and the value it is to your program. If you're running this program, let's say it's an after-school program, and you need art supplies, you need to say why you need those art supplies. If you're going to have playground equipment that you need to purchase, like balls or something like that, you need to explain why you need balls. If you, in your logical mind, think, well, there's no way we can do this program without our staff having mileage reimbursements for running around doing home visits or something like that, or they can't do it without having a cell phone that's an emergency thing that they have on them all the time if there's an accident at the school. And if you think they need to have a computer to do their reports, and you're asking for money for those things, and they just show up in your budget and you never talked about them in your narrative, you're not going to get funded for those. You better have a narrative saying, this is our staff we want, this is what they need to be successful, and it could be just in a sentence. They need a computer, they need a cell phone to have an emergency contact, they need to have mileage so they can make home visits or whatever it is. You must have mentioned it in your narrative if you're going to ask for it in your budget.
Just real quick, on your cell phone, you're only asking for 9 months, but there aren't any programs out there that will only allow you that.
That's all I'm going to reimburse them for is 9 months. They have a personal cell phone.
Oh, so you reimburse the person, okay.
Yeah, because that's all I'm employing them in after school. It's the 180 days
So you
school
kind
year.
of require them to have a personal cell phone, and then you require.
Well, it's listed as a match, too.
Is it a match on this one?
Where?
That's communication. This is about, this is all their phone.
Yeah, the match is the printing and, yeah, the stuff that the school does. Newsletters they send home to the school, anything that's saying advertising. Right. So.
That your match is more than your grant. So is that something they like to see?
Oh, they love that.
Well, it has to meet whatever the requirement. The requirement is that you had to have at least an 100% match, or 50-50. You know, if you asked for 30,000, you had to have 30,000 in match. Okay.
And some of them will allow space costs. Some of them won't. So
Yeah. You have to.
Watch.
Yep. You got to watch what they said. Okay. Let's go through this budget here. I just copied this right out of a narrative. This was number 7 in the narrative of that grant proposal as we were going through, like on the table of contents. That's why it still says a 7 at the top if you're thinking, that's kind of a weird thing. So the budget details was 7A. I always try to take my narrative and put it right into my budget. That's how I write my narrative. This is my budget narrative here. Usually you'll have a separate form that talks about what your budget is, where it might have only a line that says materials and supplies, and it's one lump sum. There's no detail there. There's no breakdown of what that material and supplies is. It'll usually have salary, benefits, materials and supplies, I don't know, travel is usually a big one. They're just generic-y kind of titles, okay? And if you just got a lump sum there and no narrative, they don't know what it is. And usually they'll ask for a narrative on it. So this is my budget narrative, okay?
On this one, did you have a separate page that was the budget? And then this was like after?
And that came on their actual form, an actual form that was required by them. Usually you'll have an application form that's basically just contact information, where do the bills go to, who's the contact person if you have questions, what's your tax ID number, you know, it's just a generic-y kind of form that's required, and it has to come in on their letterhead, you know, whatever they sent you, you type it in there. So the budgets usually are on those forms. Administrative costs. Category 1 was administrative narrative explanation, okay? And that was their title. If you're going to ask for any administrative funds, that's what the university requires. If this runs through the university, there's a website under sponsored programs. It can change yearly. Every year it might change of what that amount is. We've been fairly consistent around 8%, 8.3%, 8.5% the last few years. Since I've been here writing grants, it's been anywhere from 34% to 12% to about this 8. It's never gone really much lower than 8%.
And I had a grant once that didn't allow for any administrative costs.
If it doesn't allow for any administrative costs, the university will waive it, but you have to send in another form to the university. That's that waiver form, and you have to show the documentation in the RFP that says we do not allow administrative costs. This big federal one that was $500,000, they allowed indirect costs. We put it in. It was line item. They decided to fund more sites and cut out everyone, all 150 proposals, indirect costs. And since it was a line item, I can't adjust that and say, okay, I'm going to put that in for the university, so the university had to waive it. So yeah, sometimes you just do what the grants tell you on those kind of things, okay? Capital expenditures. Why would I include that there? I have no capital expenditures.
They must have had it on theirs.
They had it on theirs. They even said, none of this fund can be used for capital expenditures, but that's the generic form. Has a capital expenditure on it. So I have no capital expenditures, but it's there. Okay, so you can't, so not applicable for this grant application. I put that in there because they said no capital expenditures are allowed. I let them know I'm not going to charge any capital expenditures to this grant. Okay, salary and wages. Okay, I figure that out. I show the detail. You know, what my yearly salary is divided by 12 months. That's how much I'm asking for my salary to go in there. I have an after-school coordinator. She's making $12 an hour. She works 4 hours a day for 180 days. That equals $8,640. They can see the detail, okay? Club stipends. 2 clubs per day times 4 days a week times 2 semesters equals 16 clubs times a $300 stipend or scholarship for those club leaders. 4,800. So they can see the details in all of those. When it comes to doing match, like on my volunteers there, if I have 16 volunteers at about 1.5 hours each at $11 per hour, you can look up those numbers to see what the federally allowable amount is you can charge, and that's $15 right now. Are you going to ever get anyone that's being paid $15 in Utah County to be kind of like a classroom assistant or an after-school assistant? No, you're not. So I use realistic numbers. People say, I love that you don't flower your thing by putting in the max. You know, you use real logical amounts, you know.
So where'd you come up with your $11? Is that what they pay their teacher aides?
Mm-hmm. So you use theirs math. And if you have that, that's even better. I didn't copy a copy of that one, but with Alpine School District, with their after school, they actually have, okay, what lane you're on, and it's somewhere between $5 if you're this many qualifications, and these are your job assignments. This is what you're making here. It's $10.62 is what's my Alpine ones. It came from Alpine School District because that's what they'd be at. Okay, is $10.62 is what they'd start. So that'd be the amount I put in for there because that's what they'd get paid. Okay, benefits, don't ever forget your benefits. You don't see that, but it has to be there. And whatever my salary is and whatever that staff coordinator is, it's 8.25%. And you can go to Human Relations on the website at Utah State, and they will tell you what those amounts are, because sometimes they change. Space. Okay, school is donating use of the building for 4-H after-school clubs. It's $35 per hour times 3 hours per day times 4 days times 10 weeks times 2 semesters. It's $8,400. So they can see that detail. If you look down there, one of these is going to be food. Okay, this grant we didn't ask for food because the school is providing it all out of some federal funds. But when they look at that, when I've asked for it, the schools that don't qualify for the free snack because they have too many kids there and we're asking, or too many that are not the free and reduced lunch the school was. They look at that and they think, oh, that's a lot of money if it's one big total, but you think, oh, man, that's only 45 cents per day. Oh, you can't cut that. That's, the more detail you give them, they think, oh, I can't cut that, because they're being economical, or they're being those type of things. So the more detail you can give them, the better it's going to be on those things.
You didn't give them any detail on your 4-H camp retreat partial scholarship.
I did.
Oh, it's on this, it goes to the next page.
Okay, so $15 partial scholarships times 120 youth, that's what we'll serve in a school year there with 30 per day. So each kid gets a $15 scholarship towards camp. Okay.
And how come it's not in your totals?
It is, it just fell on the other page. It just split the table.
Oh, gotcha.
And when I copied this from, 7 might have not showed up at the very top of the page. It could have been down here where 7 started in that narrative. So it's just how I copied it to you.
When she was turning this in, it wouldn't have been like that.
Yeah. Registration fees we charge to be in 4-H after school. I always include the money that comes to my office as well. I charge $4 per kid to be in 4-H in Utah County, and so I make sure I pull that from every grant that goes into my normal coffers of 4-H. That makes money for 4-H. And every one of my grant proposals, let's talk about the awards and recognition, like scholarships to camps and stuff. I put down in those that these families that are at risk, or whatever the terminology is, it's good at family night outs to have modeling higher efficiency families that have more skills. So my traditional 4-H families, so I can fund them as well as the at-risk families, because I need modeling of both behaviors. At camp, these scholarships need to go to both traditional 4-H and to the others, so there's modeling. So I can offer scholarships to any kid in 4-H. I can offer my family night outs to all of 4-H. So I make sure I have that in there, so it's just not always funding just that small portion of my 4-H program. That I can open those doors if I include that terminology in my thing. Okay? And always provide your details, your calculations. Those are the little teeny things in the bold at the bottom, where how I came up with those figures. Okay? So budget's important. Okay, now to the narrative. What I do is I take, after I've done my table of contents, I always do the table of contents myself, I always do the budget myself. Everything else, I'm okay delegating to someone else, because I don't think the words are all that important, what it says. Okay, as long as you've got the structure. So I try to collaborate and delegate as many sections as I can out of these. I've got enough staff now in Utah County, that are being funded by these things, that I'll say, okay, you're in charge of all the data from your school. You make sure you hit that principal and you get how many are on free reduced lunch. You get from them, so they have to provide that to me. I'll have an intern from BYU that might be volunteering with this, or someone say, okay, you write the section on staff training. You write the section on this. And then I'll massage it once it all comes back to me. So I delegate those. If you have community partners, if you've got a principal that's, hey, I really want this. Okay, principal, you write that section. I give everyone a job. I don't do it all myself. Make sure the narrative meets all the basic guidelines for this submission. Those are the simple things. The correct number of pages. Don't go over it. It says narrative 25, make sure your narrative's 25. Okay, your font size, your margin size, double spacing, whatever it says, make sure you follow those. If it doesn't say, you have your free agency to do what you want. Be consistent and restate in their own words. Okay? There is so many ways to say the exact same thing. Okay? And when I rewrite these grant proposals, the very first thing I'll do, I'll take an old grant proposal, and it might be another entity, and this one said youth at risk in it. I'll do a find and replace search anywhere it says youth at risk, and this grant proposal said child of greatest need. That's the same thing, basically. I'll go through find and replace. Anytime it says youth at risk, replace it with child of greatest need. So you make sure you use exactly what their terminology. Even if you think, that's the same thing. But you might get an evaluator who says, never once did they say they were going to serve children of greatest need. They're going to serve those at-risk kids. That's different than what I wanted to serve. And you might think in your mind, that's the same audience. But you didn't say it, child of greatest need. You said youth at risk. So they kicked you out because you're not eligible because you're serving a different audience than we wanted. So don't do that to yourself. Make sure you use their words. That's why it's easy to really write grants once you get organized, because they give you all the words that you're going to say. You're just restating their words. Okay? This is another trick I learned over the years of doing this. And that's from Nancy. Those are the two things. Table contents and divide your sections up by their weighted. Those are the two things from working with her that I learned. Let's say you have an example. You have a 10-page narrative they're allowing you. It's worth 100 points on how they're going to evaluate you. Need statements worth 10 points. A tenth of 10 pages is 1 page. I don't go a line over 1 page talking about my need. That's the biggest mistake people make. They think they need to just expound on why they're so needy. And they'll spend a third of their whole document talking about my need. Well, it's only worth 10 points. You don't give it any more time than 1 page, which is 10% of it. You don't go a page over that.
So the grant should tell you exactly that?
The bigger the grant, they will. The smaller the money source, they won't.
They'll probably give you the 10-page narrative that's worth 100 points.
Right.
They're not going to break it down.
Mm-hmm.
So if they don't break it down, how do you kind of...
Well, that's what she's saying, is that if it's only worth 10 points.
Yeah, they might not give you this, though. If they don't, I just do what I think it is. Okay? But a lot do. You'd be surprised how many actually show you how you're going to be evaluated in this. And they...
Well, in some ways, one that I did way too long ago, they did classes on how to write it.
Mm-hmm.
They really wanted to give you their money.
Yeah.
So but they also want you to do what they want you to do. So they're going to tell you how to write it and what you need to do so you can get their money. I mean, it kind of goes both directions, you know.
Yeah, so...
They really want to give the money. They said they want to give the money away.
Yeah, they've got this pile of money. They're going to award it all. They're not going to hold it back. But there's usually enough good proposals in there that they can award it all. So these are the things to make the ones that stand up at the top. Okay, quality of the program design, 20 points. I'm going to spend 2 pages talking about that. Okay, and when I assign these out to people, I say, you have 2 pages to talk about this. Okay, staff training, 10 points. Budget narrative, almost every proposal you're going to get are more concerned with how you spend your money than what your program's going to be like. They've had so many issues over the past of fiscal irresponsibility that is getting bigger and bigger and bigger in your talk of how you're going to do this. You think, oh my honk, I got to spend 4 pages talking about my narrative of my budget? I spend 4 pages talking about it. I make sure I talk about why we need that cell phone reimbursement. I'm going to talk about why I need mileage for my staff. All those little nitpicky things, you're going to talk about it, and you're going to spend exactly 4 pages talking about it. If that's what they tell you, you need to talk about it. Okay? Evaluation, 20 points. I'm going to talk about how I'm going to evaluate this. Okay? So divide up your thing by those pages. I'll go through, and as they mention it with the points, I'll say, okay, that's 2/3 of a page. That's 1/4 of a page. You know, if it's worth 5 points, you know, whatever, out of a 25-page narrative, and they'll have a long list. Okay, I can spend 1 paragraph that's about 1/4 of a page on that topic of training. Nothing more. Kathy, you're in charge of that. Write 1/4 of a page on that. Okay? And then I take those narratives. If it's smaller, I might be writing it all myself, but if it's bigger, I try to pass that burden along to other people. You know, volunteers that are interested in it, that are at that school, or principals, or, you know, do this, and they feel like they're part of it more. It buys them in, too.
On the budget narrative, do you do that in like paragraph form, or do you do something more?
I usually do it in a table, as much as I can, because it's more logical to see. It's easier to see. And the evaluations I've got back, and they've constantly said, I love your budget narratives. I love seeing it in this format. and those things. One way to cheat, these were double spaced required. Is that double spaced?
Yep.
If you put things in tables, if your text is double spaced and then you have 3 or 4 bullets that are indented, you don't have to do those bullets double spaced. If you throw in a table or a graph, usually you don't have to have those, but as long as the majority of your text is double spaced, that's a way to get a little bit more in there. And because if you try doing this double spaced, it would look weird, and this would take me too many pages because I'm wasting space to show that kind of stuff. But they
organize so they can understand.
right. So I've never been cut down when I've thrown in tables or bullets, and it makes it's easier to read actually. If you have just straight double space, it looks monotonous and boring. If you break it up and have a few bullets and stuff, it looks better too. It's more appealing. So that's a cheat thing on your narratives that you can do. Okay, general tips. Start early on these. If you anticipate you're going to want to, if you know of a funding source that will be coming up, you could start working on it in December when it might be slower if you've got your focus done, or you could do parts of it. That's what I'm doing right now. It's like, okay, I know my big mentoring grant ends in October. Last time I wrote for this money, it was due July 7th. So I'm thinking, okay, it's going to probably come up sometime here this spring. I need to anticipate that it's coming now that I know. And they haven't announced if I can rewrite for the money yet. I don't know if you can rewrite for that same pocket of money. And so I'm looking at other alternatives. It had to be a collaboration between a school district and a community-based organization, and it actually had to be submitted by the LEA, the local educational entity. So it had to be submitted by Alpine School District. So I went to the school districts. They said they'd be willing to do it, even though it's only serving 3 of their schools, 3 other schools in the other district, 3 of those schools in the other district, okay? I went to Provo at first, because they're the ones I had the strongest tie with. Like, nah, we're writing for this money. We're not going to let you write for it, so we're writing for it. So I went to Alpine, and sure, we'll let you do it. Nebo will never let me do anything. So I know the dynamics of those offices or their administration. So I went to Alpine. They said, sure, we'll let you write for it. Well, this next time I'm thinking, okay, if I can write for both, I'm going to write one for Provo School District, and I'm going to write for one for Alpine. If they allow me to rewrite, sometimes they won't. You have to have a cycle off and cycle back on. If I can only write for one, I'm going to work with Provo. They have a new grant writer. It's not Nancy anymore. She's retired. So the person might be more acceptable to me writing it and say, hey, you guys were not funded last time. We were. We're already serving 4 of your schools. We want to keep this going. I haven't done that yet, but that's my goal here in December. I'm going to start making those contacts before this happens, so we can write it from them. If they let me write for both, I'm going to write for both. Okay? And if not, I'm going for 2 options to maybe write for that money. But usually you're only given 30 to 60 days from when they put the RFP out to when it's due. So if you take that time frame, let's say they give you 60 days, by the time it gets in the Clover Corner News, let's say, and they send out only once a month, and then I get down like, oh, it's usually 3 to 4 weeks later that I'm hearing about something that's come up. With the big one, I know when it's going to show up, so I'll start going to grants.gov, because I know it's going to show up. But when you're first hearing these things, you might not know, and you have 2 to 3 weeks to write this whole thing for when you hear about it to when it's due. So as early as you can, start on it, because you're in time crunch situation when those come. If possible, try to get a winning example from a previous year. And I forgot to bring them in after we're done. I'll go get you a CD. I've given you each this PowerPoint plus 3 or 4 different grant examples that have won on there that you can use that have won. I always submit mine early. I never leave it to the last time, and my mental due date is a week before when it's due. And there's several reasons for that. Yeah.
Well, I think I switched pages.
Okay. Okay, I always submit it early. There's several reasons I do that. And it's not in here, but I'm going to talk about it right here, is when the proposal comes out, there's usually a contact name on that person if you have questions or concerns. Always, always, always call that person. It can be a stupid question. Ask something. You know, an example is JCPenney money. Okay? It was a horrible RFP. You can tell they'd never written one really before. It's the first time they'd asked for money. Okay, I'm on the phone. Okay, this is what I want to do. This is the kind of program we run. Would this qualify? Would this work? And they're saying, oh, no, 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 no. That won't work. It has to be 5 days a week. We were only doing 4 days a week. We have early out Mondays, so the schools didn't want to do Monday 4-H. So we were only doing 4 days. It's got to be 5 days a week. And we only had one school that was actually doing 5 days, Timpanogos, because they got gazillions of money because they're the poor school. So I kind of explained my program. They had contact with me. Okay. Then a week later, they send out a revised RFP. Basically, it had everything I had asked them questions that they hadn't covered. I'm like, you didn't ask this, you didn't ask that, you didn't say it had to be this. You know, they didn't give enough detail of what their mindset of what they wanted. So they sent this revised RFP, and then when they awarded the money, because they had these 2 RFPs that were out and some people never saw the revised and they were working off the other and they weren't ever answering the questions of what they were really wanting to evaluate on. They didn't tell you what they were evaluating on, but in their minds they did. They sent out another letter that said, okay, does your program operate 5 days a week? Does it go the entire school year? Does, you know, things that they wanted in there that they never had you address. If so, sign this, that yes it does, or which ones don't apply. Well, that narrowed down their pool of who they could award because they had all these proposals that didn't qualify. So then they call me on the phone. Hey, JoLene, I know you were thinking about doing this for 7 schools. You're in 7 different schools. This could only be support money. You already have a program running. And you only submitted for one, about $10,800. Oh, first they said, okay, we have some additional money. If there's any way you can use more money in your site, but you still had to have 100% match, and it couldn't be volunteer match. It had to be hard dollar match. You know, it couldn't be in kind. So it had to actually be dollars there. And because of the university, you can't use federal money to match other federal money, but this is corporate, so you can use it, federal money to match, you know, just a lot of little details you learn as you're working with sponsored programs on campus, all the mistakes you make over the years, and they say, no, you can't do that. So you do have to have them approved through them before you submit them. And so I increased it to like $11,800, you know, $1,200 more, because that's what I could have hard core money. That was programming money, could be salary money and, you know, kind of stuff. So I matched that, and then they called me back on the phone. This is Wednesday, and they said, you know, we still have a lot of money that we haven't been able to award. There's just no one increased enough, and they're increasing, and I know you have these other 6 schools that we're not funding. They wouldn't have known that if I hadn't called them and talked to them, okay? They says, is there any way you think they'll go 5 days? Everything else fits, except for the 5 days. And I thought, they're not going to go for it. It's early out Monday. Teachers are still already there. They're in their classrooms. They're not going to give up their classrooms. I called every single principal. Some were on summer vacation, had their secretaries call on their cell phone, wherever they were. Every single principal said, yeah, we'll make it work. If we can get another $11,800 for each school, we'll do it. So everyone did. I got $113,400 from JCPenney. Okay? They had a pie of $2 million they were willing to give. They want to give it. Okay? So that's why I call ahead. Another reason I call ahead, because, and you show up early to turn that in, if it's physically possible, I hand deliver those. So if it's going to the state office in Salt Lake, if it's going to Provo, I never mail them. I'm not going to hand deliver it to Washington, D.C. You know, those I'll mail, but then I give myself a whole week. If there's a problem in the mail, it's going to get there. But when I bring in my Youth Connection grants to Salt Lake, I brought in 3 from Utah State University, because that's the max each entity could write for. And I brought 3 in from Alpine School District with their tax ID number. I wrote them. They're submitting it under them. Okay, I brought those in. He's like, oh yeah, hi JoLene, I talked to you on the phone. You know, that personal contact person where they're stamping them, signing them, they know, oh yeah, your program was this. Oh yeah, you're doing 4-H. Because I talked to them, or I kind of remind them, hi, nice to meet you now. I talked to you on the phone 3 weeks ago. Oh yeah, you know, yeah, you're that program, right? So then they have that personal contact. Even though they might not be the evaluator, usually that administrator cannot evaluate and select, but I think they have a little bit of weight, you know, administrators there. So they have that personal contact. If you're waiting to the very last minute, you're number 82 in line as they're trying to stamp these before 5 o'clock. If they don't get a stamp, it's too bad. Ann Parkinson wrote for 3 of the same thing and hit traffic, missed the deadline. They won't even accept them. 1 minute late. They'll just say, open your books, open your grant proposals, and he'll run down and stamp them. You know, and not even know who you are. Try to get it in if you're there at the last minute, because it better say 4:59, 5 o'clock on that stamp. If it's 5:01, they can't accept it. They're firm on those things, so I always submit them early. I brought them in like 10 days early this time. It's like, why so early? Oh, I'm going to Lake Powell the week they're due. Oh, okay, you know. So I just always turn them in early. Address every goal and objective that's in the proposal. Follow the exact format. We've talked about most of these. Be very specific, organized, and thorough. And if you fail to receive funds, don't be devastated. That's part of the learning process. You've got to fail a few times. I didn't get every grant I've ever written. I've been very successful. The average professional grant writer says they get 30% of everything they write. Okay? So if you're getting a 30% track record, you're doing awesome. You're like the professionals. I've got a better return than that. And I'm not a professional grant writer. And I'm not a good writer. That's my weak point, is writing. But I can be structured. I can be organized. And that's why I think that's more important. Over the last 6-7 years, I've gotten over $2 million in grants for Utah County 4-H program. And I have 14 staff working for me.
So how do you find out what you did wrong? Are they willing to receive calls and say?
Depending on how big it is. The bigger the funding source, if it's federal, they'll send you your evaluations back. The first time I wrote for the $500,000 type money pie for mentoring, I didn't get it. And I used that as a base for the next time I wrote it, and I went through and says, okay, they didn't like this, I wasn't clear on this, they didn't understand. They started to talk about that. That's right there, it's in there, they missed it. But then I learned you got to do a table of contents, you know, and then they'll see it's there, okay? So, and one of the main things is I used Youth and Families with Promise in my first one. And one of the evaluators, oh, they're already receiving federal money. They don't need this, you know? And then the next time it's 4-H mentoring, very generic. It could be any kind of program. And I didn't have that problem. So I made sure I didn't say Youth and Families with Promise anywhere in my program. Plus, being a specific name like that, it doesn't give you details. You don't know what that is. Is it a mentoring program? If you were evaluator that has no idea, they're relying on your dialogue to tell them what that is. But 4-H mentoring, oh, you know it's mentoring. Oh, you know it's a 4-H program, you know? So that's what I've done.
So sometimes your same programs will have 5 different names depending on the grant.
Yeah. But usually they say the same though. Most of them will say 4-H after school mentoring, and it drives the university nutso. Because all of these grant entities are named the same, and they can't tell them apart. And then they'll say, well, it's this program. Tell me what school name. Give me the index number. Because then I'll look up what grant they're trying to talk to me about, because I use the same name in most of them, because that's very generic. I include my after school in it. I include my mentoring in either audience it is. And I ask for some money for both, and every little thing, like if it's I ask for at least one club of stipends out of a mentoring program at that school. Or I'll ask for at least 3 or 4 family night outs out of the other pie, or at least one, you know, so I kind of mixing my money up. So But usually they'll give you an evaluation. The smaller it is, you're out of luck. You just have to, you're not going to get comments. Though some will even say, if it's a private money, there's no way you're going to get any feedback. They don't want to be bothered. You don't have to write that much. You know, this is the goodness of their heart. You don't have to do that much reporting. You don't have to justify very much. JCPenney is, if you say you're going to do it, we sent you 2/3 of your money. I got a check for $84,000, $87,000. Okay? They had the first report saying, yes, we're operating. I've increased, their goal was to increase kids in after school. I've increased from my original money, which provided 16 clubs per year, to 40 clubs per year. I didn't have to pay additional staff. I just had to get more volunteers and club leaders. And I was able to increase. They wanted a max of 45. I just picked 45 that are new enrollees, because we were over 45. And I put, all my report was, what are those 45 kids' names? And they had their first initial, last name, or first name and last initial, I think is what they asked for, and their ethnic breakdown, just right out of MarTech kind of stuff. For those 45 kids, sent that in. 2 weeks later, here came the rest of the money. I don't have to send in a budget reports to them, how I spend the money. I don't have to justify how I spend the money. I just have to spend it during the school year. And if we have money left over, because they haven't spent their service project money and stuff, I'm going to buy 15 sewing machines, and I'm going to buy, we can use for a club, and I can also use it for sewing camps and all this stuff. So I've got goals up there that I can spend it. It's possible. I'm just a lowly county agent. I'm not a grant writer. I'm not, that's a small portion of my job assignment, and it can be done. Just give it a try. It's really not as hard as it seems. Overwhelming. It really does when you first think about it. But start small. The first one I wrote was like for $10,000. Okay, I can manage that. I can write for another one. I can write for another one. And now I've got this huge conglomerate of money out there that I can't manage myself. But when to me, it was like at the 3 grant level is beyond my ability to manage myself. And at that point, you need to make sure your grants are big enough that you're funding a whole nother person that's managing. That's what I do. I have a person that's my grant manager that manages all these staff that I have and their professional status. I taught the university in professional status, so they're just like me. They're my coworker, and not an assistant or whatever. Professional status, they're going to get, they manage all of that. They do all the reports. They do all of this. And I just work on getting the money. Now, because I can't, what's managing it, I couldn't do my real job and to manage more than about 3 grants. So now I'm at 7, 8, some big money kind of things, but I have someone running that. So you got to get, you're at that stage where you can manage 2 or 3. If you're going bigger than that, you got to get enough money that you can replace yourself, basically. Because it's going to take a whole nother person to run more than that.
How do you do that?